Hey guys, tonight we begin with something you might not have put on your travel itinerary: ancient Rome's laundry day. Yes, if you wake up tomorrow and suddenly find yourself in the middle of a bustling Roman street, wearing a toga that's already managed to pick up a suspicious stain, you're about to learn why your chances of staying fresh and clean are dim. You might survive the Colosseum crowds, maybe even the seafood market smell, but when it comes to your laundry, let's just say you wouldn't last a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below with your city and the time right now. I love seeing the patchwork quilt of where and when you're all listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice about Roman laundry is that it doesn't look like laundry at all. Forget the hum of modern washing machines or the smell of lemon detergent. Instead, you hear the slush of wooden buckets being tipped into stone basins and the sharp, eye-watering tang of ammonia filling the air. That's not an accident, it's urine, collected from your neighbors, your friends, even strangers passing through the forum. And for Romans, this was completely ordinary. You wander down the alleyway toward the full-on arcade Roman laundry workshop. The doorway is wide, with smoke-stained lintels, and inside you see workers standing ankle-deep in tubs of liquid. Their job: to stomp, not grates, not olives, but clothes, using their feet like plumbers. It's a strange ballet of stepping, twisting, and squeezing, all in a frothy mix of water and urine. You catch yourself wrinkling your nose because yes, it smells exactly the way you think it does. But here's the twist: it worked. Urine contains ammonia, a natural cleaning agent. Romans didn't have a name for the chemical, but they knew that after a few days of fermenting in jars, the liquid gained a kind of magical power. It cut through grease and brightened fabric. Think of it as the original OshiClean, though definitely not something you'd want in a TV commercial. Historians are still debating just how effective it was. Did it really whiten togas to a dazzling brightness? Or was the smell so strong that people simply assumed cleanliness had been achieved? The jury is still out. For you, standing in the corner of the laundry house, the experience is overwhelming. One worker stomps while another rinses, pouring buckets of cold water from a cistern. The garments are draped on wooden racks, steam rising under the Roman sun. A boy with bare feet runs past, you carrying yet another amphora of fresh supplies, collected from the public latrine down the street. Everyone acts as if this is the most normal thing in the world. And in a way, it is. Clean clothing wasn't just about hygiene, it was about reputation. Toga that looked dull or dingy marked you as careless, maybe even lazy. In a society where appearances mattered, laundry was social armor. Might be sweating through the chaos of the forum, but at least your toga needed to gleam. The funny part, Romans themselves often joked about it. Imagine standing in a crowd, trying to impress someone with your gleaming outfit, while both of you know that your bright whiteness came courtesy of last night's chamber pot. It's the kind of historical irony that never really fades. As you linger a moment longer, you realize that Rome's laundry industry isn't just about fabrics, it's about the city itself, the collection, the stamping, the rinsing gall of it creates a rhythm, a heartbeat of urban life, and for you, the traveler who just stepped into this world, the smell clings to your clothes, your hair, and maybe even your memories, whether you like it or not. You're now part of Rome's great washing machine. You've made it through your first encounter with Roman laundry, and maybe you thought the worst was over. But then the question pops into your mind, where on earth did they get all that urine? Because you've just seen workers knee deep in the stuff, and clearly one family's bathroom isn't enough to keep the whole city's togas spotless. The answer is everywhere in Rome. Urine wasn't a private matter, it was a public resource. Step outside your insulated apartment block, where most Romans lived, and you'll see large clay jars positioned right at the entrance. These weren't decorative. Neighbors, visitors, even complete strangers could relieve themselves right into the pot. If you thought neighborhood watch was a modern concept, here it was more of a neighborhood contribution. Might grumble about noisy neighbors, but at least their bladders were helping keep your tunic white. And then there were the public latrines. Imagine a long marble bench, holes carved neatly in a row, and a steady stream of water trickling below. Romans would sit side by side, shoulder to shoulder, with no partitions, discussing politics, gossip, or the latest gladiator match while taking care of business. Not only did this produce a constant supply of liquid gold, but it also created an atmosphere that was equal parts civic duty and social club for you trying to relax enough to join in. Let's just say your modern sense of privacy takes a hard hit. The collected urine was hauled away in amphory large clay jars by boys and men who were known to dash between households, scooping up full containers and swapping them for empty ones. They weren't ashamed, they were part of the supply chain. This was an entire microeconomy. One person's waste became another's paycheck. What's remarkable is how organized it all was. You could almost call it a sanitation system, though not in the way you'd expect. Archaeologists still debate whether the Romans fully understood the cleaning power of ammonia, or if they just noticed results and stuck with it. Some suggest it was sheer trial and error, passed down like an old family recipe. Let it ferment 3 days, then pour it over the toga. Trust me, it works. Others argue that Roman craftsmen were more observant than we give them credit for, deliberately refining techniques over generations. The debate continues, and maybe that's part of the chumpions hiding in plain sight, wrapped in clay jars and everyday habits. As you walk past these amphorae, lined up along the narrow streets, you can't help but chuckle at the sight. Imagine a modern city where you leave buckets of bodily waste outside your door, waiting for collection like today's recycling bins in Rome. This wasn't disgusting, it was civic participation. You were helping to keep the empire cleaner, at least looking clean. And then there's the smell. You're strolling past a row of shops, And every so often a breeze catches you off guard. Some corners reek of spices, others of frying fish, and then, inevitably, a sharp note of ammonia slices through it all. It's not unbearable, but it's unforgettable. The whole city carries this undertone, a reminder that Roman cleanliness was a team effort, one jar at a time. You've now seen the jars outside the houses, the boys running amphorae through the streets, and the public latrines full of chatter. But let's step deeper into the world of those who turn this river of waste into shining white togas thiefalones. These were Rome's professional laundry workers, the beating heart of the industry, and the reason senators could strut into the forum, looking like they'd been hand-polished by the gods. The Phalonica, or laundry workshop, isn't hard to find. You follow the sound of stomping feet and sloshing liquid, and that smell well that leads you the rest of the way inside. It feels like you've stepped into a strange hybrid between a bathhouse, a brewery, and maybe even a dance hall. White stone basins line the floor, each filled with cloudy liquid. Men with rolled up tunics are inside, stepping and twisting, pounding fabric rhythmically underfoot. From a distance, it almost looks like they're performing a synchronized routine. Only the stage is liquid ammonia and the audience is flies. Their job wasn't glamorous, but it was critical. Phalones weren't just cleaners, they were restorers. They whitened wool, softened linen, and even re-dyed fabrics when the color had faded. For wealthy clients, this meant your toga or tunic came back brighter than before, almost glowing in the sunlight. For everyday folks, it meant that your work clothes could last a little longer before falling apart. And make no mistake, this was an industry, not a hobby. Fullers' guilds were powerful, with their own meeting places, rituals, and even patron gods. In some cities, they were among the largest organized trades. They negotiated prices, set standards, and defended their craft's honor. Even if the craft itself required stomping around in yesterday's chamber pot, historians still argue about just how prestigious the profession was. Some see it as humble, dirty work. Others point out that the guild's influence shows it was respected, maybe even feared. The debate, like the smell, lingers in the air. You linger at the edge of the workshop, watching the process unfold. A worker holds dripping garments from the basin and wrings them out with strong, practiced twists. Another carries them over to be brushed with fuller's earth, a type of clay that absorbed grease and odors. The garments are then laid out to dry on wooden racks in the sun. Step by step, the filth disappears, replaced by a crisp whiteness that almost blinds you. You wouldn't call it fresh in the modern sense, but it certainly looks impressive. The Phalones themselves don't seem to mind the conditions. They chat as they stomp, swapping gossip about politics or laughing at jokes. You can quite catch one of them hums a tune. To them, it's just a day at work. To you, standing in sandals that you suddenly wish were taller, it's a surreal performance you'll never forget. You can't help but notice how democratic the business is in its own odd way. Every class of Roman, from lowly workers to senators, depends on the Phalones. Without them, The empire's social fabric literally would fray. The guild sits at the intersection of wealth and waste, dignity and dirt, and somehow, in the swish of liquid and the stamp of bare feet, Rome keeps its public face spotless. You've seen the workers stomp, the guilds organize, and the togas emerge dazzling white. But the real secret, the invisible star of the show, is the chemistry bubbling away inside every jar. And here's the kicker. The Romans had no idea they were doing chemistry. They just knew it worked. Step closer to one of those amphorae sitting in the corner of the Polonica. At first glance, it looks innocent enough, clean jar, eyed mouth. Nothing unusual, but lean over and you're hit with a wave of sharp, stinging fumes that practically bring tears to your eyes. Adds ammonia, slowly forming as urine breaks down. The longer it sits, the stronger it gets. To Romans, this wasn't gross, it was power in liquid form. You watch as a worker ladles the fermented mixture into a basin, the clothes dunked inside. Don't look any happier about it than you do. But after a session of stomping, something almost magical happens. The grease fades, the fibers brighten, and stains that once clung like cold gossip seem to loosen their grip. It's alchemy without the gold. The funny part, the Romans had no scientific vocabulary for this. They weren't talking about ammonium hydroxide or pH levels. They just knew that if you left liquid in a jar for a few days, it gained a kind of cleaning bite. It was folk knowledge turned industry practice, passed along by generations of fellows who learned from their fathers and their fathers' fathers. Modern scientists, of course, have poked their noses into this metaphorically. Thankfully, they've confirmed that ammonia is indeed a powerful cleaning agent. But historians still argue, were the Romans simply stumbling along by trial and error? Or did they actually recognize patterns and refine them intentionally? Was there a proto-scientific method in these smelly jars? The debate continues, like a stubborn stain that refuses to wash out. Meanwhile, you find yourself thinking about the paradox in Rome. Filth became the path to cleanliness, waste turned into utility. The city was recycling before recycling was a word, and though you try not to breathe too deeply, there's a quiet respect that sneaks in because behind every gleaming toga was not just status and politics, but a kind of early chemistry lab humming along in the shadows. As you leave the workshop, the smell still clinging to your cloak, you wonder if you'll ever be able to look at a modern bottle of detergent the same way again. Compared to Rome's methods, your lavender-scented laundry pods feel almost boring. You're still blinking away the sting of ammonia when you realize this wasn't just about clean clothes, it was about reputation. In Rome, appearance could decide your future. A toga wasn't just fabric, it was a billboard, and the brighter it shone, the louder it spoke. Picture yourself stepping into the forum on market day. Merchants shout about olives, senators stride past in conversation, and, oh wow, you look down at your toga and see faint stains from last week's wine mishap. Suddenly, you understand why Romans were willing to put up with laundry that smelled like a stable. A clean toga was political currency. It said, I'm respectable, I'm trustworthy. Please don't notice that I just dripped on a paving stone. For senators and elite citizens, the stakes were even higher. Their garments had to glow. White wasn't just a fashion choice, it symbolized purity, authority, and civic duty. A toga that looked dingy could whisper of laziness, even moral failure. And if you were a candidate running for office, forget campaign posters, Sire toga did the talking. In fact, the Latin word candidatus candidate comes from candidus, meaning bright white. Your career literally depended on looking like you just stepped out of a bucket of ammonia. The irony, of course, is that everyone knew what it took to achieve that brightness. You might be shaking hands with a senator, nodding at his gleaming outfit, all the while thinking, nice glow, sir, courtesy of 100 amphorae of fermented urine. It's the kind of historical contradiction that makes you want to laugh and gag at the same time. Some households tried to keep up appearances without the guilds, sprinkling urine on their linens at home or hiring a local washerwoman for smaller loads, but nothing compared to the Fullones' expertise. Their combination of stamping, rinsing, and clay powder finishing gave clothes that blinding edged sort of whiteness that made people squint and whisper. Historians are still debating how much this obsession shaped Roman society. Did the pressure to keep one's toga spotless contribute to the demand for ever expanding public sanitation, or was it mostly a status game, confined to the elite? The sources don't agree, and maybe that's fitting after all. Reputation has always been slippery, like trying to keep a toga clean in the middle of a dusty Roman street. For you, trailing behind a senator into the forum, the message is loud and clear. When it came to politics, Rome didn't just value speeches or promises, it valued laundry, and if your toga wasn't glowing, your career probably wasn't either. You've seen the shining togas in the forum, but let's be honest, style nose is still recovering, because Rome wasn't just marble temples and triumphal arches, it was a city with a smell, and laundry day made sure you noticed. Walk with me down a Roman street. On one corner, a baker's oven is spilling out the warm, nutty aroma of fresh bread. Few steps later, a fishmonger is shouting over a pile of salted mullet, and the scent, well, it's not winning any awards. Then suddenly, like a slap in the air, comes that unmistakable sting of ammonia drifting out from a Phalonica. One whiff and you're wide awake. Oh, not in a way you'd call pleasant. Rome was alive with layers of smell, spices from the east, smoky braziers from street vendors, perfumes wafting from wealthy homes, and underneath it all, the earthy reek of thousands of people living shoulder to shoulder at an amphorae of urine stacked outside workshops, waiting to be hauled in, and you get an urban perfume no candle maker would dare to recreate. And yet, Romans were oddly unbothered. To them, this was the scent of a functioning city, the smell of money. Even the Fullers Guild was booming, and every sharp breath in the laundry district reminded you that the economy was hard at work. Historians are still unsure how people tolerated it so casually. Did their noses adapt? Or were they simply less fussy than we are today? The debate lingers. The one thing certain, to live in Rome was to live in a world where smell and status were always colliding. You pass a group of children darting between alleys, holding their noses and laughing as they run past a row of jars. A woman scolds them, warning that without those jars, their father's tunics wouldn't be fit to wear at the baths. Even the jokes on the street leaned into the reality. Rome was proud, powerful, and let's face, it's smelly. As the sun dips lower, you catch yourself oddly comforted by it all. The mix of aromas, strange as it is, belongs to the rhythm of the city. And while the memory of ammonia clings stubbornly to your cloak, you realize that this scent is as much a marker of Rome as the Colosseum itself. For better or worse, this was the smell of empire. By now, you've pieced together that Roman laundry wasn't just about stains and smells, it was also about taxes. And the emperor who turned urine into profit was none other than Vespasian. Yes, the man who built the Colosseum also made history by charging Rome for its bathroom breaks. Here's how it happened in the 1st century CE. Vespasian needed revenue, wars, construction projects, and the endless maintenance of empire drained the treasury. So he looked around for anything that could be taxed, and there it was, the steady stream of jars filled with urine, flowing into laundries across the city. If fullers were making money stomping in ammonia, then the state was going to take its share. The tax was simple. Collectors gathered urine from public latrines, sold it to the fullones, and a portion of the profit went straight into imperial coffers. People grumbled, of course, a tax on what comes out of me, really. But Vespasian didn't flinch. His logic was iron-clad. If waste had value, then a state had a right to tap it. The moment became so famous that it left us with a Latin phrase still quoted today: Pecuniae non olet, money does not stink. According to the story, when Vespasian's son Titus complained about the embarrassment of such a tax, the emperor held a coin under his nose and asked whether it smelled. Titus said no, yet Vespasian replied, "It comes from urine, case closed." You can almost picture the scene, the emperor, calm and pragmatic, shrugging off the ridicule, while the laundry workers sighed at their slightly thinner profits. It's the kind of policy that feels both absurd and inevitable. In Rome, everything had a price to even the contents of a public latrine. Historians still debate how widespread or long-lasting this tax really was. Some argue it was a minor revenue stream, barely noticed in the grand imperial budget. Others suggest it was symbolically powerful, showing Rome's knack for squeezing value from every corner of life. Either way, the phrase stuck, echoing down the centuries as a reminder that money, however it's earned, keeps its shine. As you stand in line at a bustling latrine, amphorae being swapped in and out beside you, you can't help but marvel at the system. Rome wasn't just collecting waste, it was turning it into empire-building fuel. And though you'd prefer not to dwell on the details, the truth is inescapable. Vespasian made sure that every drop counted. You leave the Phallonica and head toward the baths, hoping to escape the pungent reminders of your laundry adventure. And for a moment, you do. The Therme roams public baths another universe entirely. The air is heavy with steam, tinged with the fragrance of walls and incense. Marble floors glisten under torchlight, and conversations hum in the vaulted ceilings like the soft drone of bees. This is where Romans came to wash, to gossip, to conduct business, and sometimes just to show off. You lower yourself into the caldarium, the hot pool, and the water wraps around you like a blanket. Suddenly, wandering seems far away here. Cleanliness is about luxury. A slave pours warm water from a bronze jug. Another offers a strigil to scrape sweat and dirt from your skin. You feel pampered, almost reborn. For a fleeting moment, you believe you've escaped the empire's obsession with buckets and basins. But then you step outside, across the street, amphorae of urine are stacked like firewood, waiting for collection. Workers carry bundles of damp cloth to dry in the sun. The city, it seems, has their faces, one polished in marble, the other sloshing in clay jars. The contradiction is hard to ignore. For the Romans, though it made perfect sense, the baths symbolized refinement, culture, and social connection. The Phalanca represented necessity, labor, and the invisible machinery that kept society presentable. Could spend your afternoon lounging in scented oils, but the toga you wore into the baths probably passed through a vat of ammonia that morning. Historians still puzzle over this contrast. Did Romans see it as hypocrisy or simply balance? Was it embarrassing to step from perfumed waters into streets lined with jars, or was it just another layer of urban life? The records don't give us a clear answer, leaving modern scholars to argue whether the baths and laundries reflected a cultural duality or a kind of practical harmony. As you towel off, slipping back into your newly freshened tunic, the irony hits you. You're clean because of two systems working in parallel, one that made you smell like roses, and another that made your clothes smell faintly like, well, not roses, and yet, together, they created the Roman ideal of cleanliness. Walking home through the twilight, you realize the truth. In Rome, luxury and labor were never far apart. One side of the street offered marble pools and fragrant walls, the other offered amphorae stacked high with last night's collection, and you, caught between them, are somehow part of both worlds at once. By now, you've seen the togas whitened, the amphorae stacked, and even the emperor's coin trick, but step inside the Phalanca again, and you'll notice something else. The place is buzzing not just with work, but with chatter. Laundry in Rome wasn't silent drudgery, it was a social scene. Picture the workshop at midday, the basins are full, workers are stomping rhythmically, and voices carry over the slush of liquid. One man is telling the story of a gladiator match he saw last week. Another is grumbling about grain prices. Someone bursts into laughter, stomping harder in the vat as if to underline his joke. You catch a snatch of song, half work chant, half folk tune. The smell is awful, yes, but the energy feels strangely lively. For clients dropping off their garments, The laundry also became a place to swap news. You might overhear debates about a new law in the Senate or gossip about which senator's daughter had been spotted sneaking out after dark. In some ways, the Phalonica functioned like a neighborhood cafe minus the coffee and plus the vats of urine. Even children got in on the atmosphere. Boys darted between workers, carrying smaller jugs, trying to prove they were strong enough to join the guild one day. Older men passed along tricks of the trade, how long to soak wool, how to judge the ripeness of an amphora by smell alone. You wince at that last detail, but they seem proud, almost competitive, as if expertise were measured in nasal endurance. Historians still argue about whether these laundries doubled as informal meeting houses. Some sources suggest guild leaders hosted feasts and gatherings, turning the Phalonica into a hub of community life. Others dismiss this as romanticizing dirty work, insisting it was too foul to be anything but purely practical. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in between. From your corner, watching workers stomp and joke, you realize that laughter is part of the process. The absurdity of the job smells, the stains, the endless stomping was made lighter by conversation. It wasn't just about producing clean clothes, it was about producing a rhythm of life, where gossip and camaraderie softened the harsher edges of the work. By the time you leave, you've almost forgotten how bad it smells. What lingers instead is the sound of voices echoing in the stone room, mixing with the slap of white fabric and the splash of water. Laundry in Rome was less a solitary chore and more a community performance, equal parts work, news cycle, and comedy show. You've gotten used to the rhythm of the Phalonica stomping feet, gossip in the air, jars being swapped at the door. But pause for a moment and look at the garments themselves, because in Rome, clothes weren't just clothes, they were markers of who you were, where you stood, and sometimes what you dared to dream of becoming. Start with the toga. Heavy, draped, and gleaming white, it wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a civic uniform. Only Roman citizens could wear it, and even then, only on special occasions. To put on a toga was to wrap yourself in the empire's identity. Senators wore a version with a broad purple stripe, signaling their status like a neon sign in a crowd. Boys wore a toga with a narrower stripe until they came of age, the fabric itself announcing their transition into adulthood. Meanwhile, the everyday tunic was the workhorse of Roman life, shorter, lighter, and practical for labor. Soldiers had their versions, designed for marching and fighting. Slaves often wore simpler versions still, little more than functional cloth, easy to wash, easy to replace. And then there were women's stolas, flowing garments that hinted at both modesty and elegance. Every stitch whispered of rank, role, and reputation. For the Phalones, this meant every load of laundry carried social weight. Washing a senator's toga wasn't the same as scrubbing a laborer's tunic. The garments arrived with their status baked in, and when they left gleaming white or freshly dyed, that status was reinforced. In a sense, the laundry industry wasn't just cleaning. Fabricate was maintaining the empire's hierarchy, one ring at a time. Of course, not everyone agreed on the importance of spotless fabric. Some historians argue that Rome's obsession with bright whiteness was exaggerated, pointing out that city streets were dusty, food markets messy, and clothes probably never stayed pristine for long. Others insist that the evidence, literary jokes, political speeches, archaeological finds shows that whiteness was a genuine fixation. The debate lingers, much like the faint odor of ammonia clinging to every toga. As you trail behind a senator into the forum, you notice how people glance at his toga before they meet his eyes. That brightness commands attention, almost as if the fabric speaks before he does, and you, looking down at your own less than glorious tunic, can't help but feel the social gap written across cloth. By the time you step out of the crowd, you realize the truth. In Rome, your wardrobe wasn't just something you wore. It was something that wore you, announcing your place in society before you even opened your mouth. By now you've seen how Romans relied on urine as their main laundry aid, but that wasn't their only trick. The phalanx were nothing if not experimental, and sometimes their methods veered from clever to downright questionable. Take Fuller's earth, for instance, a fine clay that absorbed walls and odors. After a stamp in urine, garments were rubbed with this powder, brushed into the fabric, and then rinsed out to leave a smoother finish. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of whitening toothpaste. But for your toga, then there was sulfur. Clothes could be hung in small chambers where sulfur was burned, bleaching the fibers with a ghostly pallor. It worked, yes, but breathing inside those rooms was another story entirely. You'd step out coughing, clutching your throat, and wondering whether fashion was worth your lungs. And then there were the stranger attempts. Some launderers experimented with ash, mixing it with water to create a mild lye solution. Others sprinkled vinegar on cloth in hopes of disinfecting it. There are even records of chalk being rubbed into wool, trying to mimic brightness with a sort of primitive concealer. Standing in the middle of all this, you can't help but smirk. It's like watching an empire-wide commercial break. Does your toga lackluster? Try ash, vinegar, and a little divine intervention. Historians still debate how effective these mixtures really were. Did sulfur bleaching truly brighten clothes long term? Or did it just leave fabric brittle and sour smelling? Was Fuller's earth a miracle product, or just a decent placebo that helped scrape away grime? No consensus exists, leaving modern scholars scratching their heads and maybe holding their noses over the recipes passed down in Roman households. For you, wandering through the back room of a Phalonica, it all feels oddly familiar. Rows of jars, powders, and liquids stacked on shelves could be mistaken for a medieval apothecary, or maybe even the cleaning aisle of your local supermarket. If you squint past the amphory, it's a reminder that humans, across every age, have been inventing and testing miracle cleaning solutions, always chasing the dream of making old things look new again. As you step back into the daylight, a toga flaps overhead on a drying rack, gleaming from its sulfur bath, while another is dusted with chalk, and you, brushing the residue of clay from your hands, realize something amusing. Rome wasn't just pioneering chemistry, it was pioneering advertising slogans. You might think that when the Roman Empire crumbled, people would abandon the whole business of stomping in vats of urine. Surely, you tell yourself, medieval Europe would come up with something more refined, but as you step forward in time, discover the habit didn't vanish, it lingered, stubborn as a stain that won't wash out. In towns across medieval Europe, laundry still relied on urine for cleaning cloth. Wool, in particular, demanded it. Freshly woven wool fabric was greasy with natural lanolin, and to prepare it for dyeing, fullers soaked it in vats of fermented urine. The process even kept its old Roman name filling. You watch as workers in coarse tunics repeat the same stomping steps, their feet plunging into the murky mixture, while bundles of cloth are hauled in and out with wooden paddles. Different century, same unmistakable smell. Some cities even built fulling mills, where water wheels powered wooden hammers that pounded the cloth. It was mechanization, yes, but the recipe hadn't changed. Water, clay, and urine. Imagine being the poor apprentice assigned to refill the vats. You might dream of chivalry and castles, but your day job involved lugging barrels of waste through cobbled streets. Historians still argue about how continuous the tradition really was. Did medieval people preserve Roman techniques directly, or did they reinvent them out of necessity? Some claim written records prove a line of inheritance. Others argue that any society dealing with greasy wool would eventually stumble on the same smelly solution. Either way, the evidence is there in guild manuals and municipal records. Urine was still central to textile work long after emperors had fallen. And it didn't stop at laundry. Medieval households sometimes used urine to bleach linen, tan leather, or even clean floors. A bucket in the corner wasn't just waste, it was multi-purpose. Shudder to imagine the smell inside a one-room cottage where cooking, sleeping, and collecting all happened under the same thatch roof. As you stroll through a medieval street, the parallels to Rome strike you hard. The sound of hammers at the mill, the sight of cloth hanging to dry, the faint sting in your nose, it all feels like déjà vu. Empires might rise and fall, but dirty laundry waits for no one. And humanity, for all its inventions, kept reaching for the same ancient fix, century after century. You've traced this odd tradition from Rome into medieval Europe, and the pattern is clear. Urine worked. But here's where things get amusing. The argument over how well it worked has never really stopped. Scholars still wrinkle their brows and maybe their noses over the question, did Roman clothes actually end up cleaner or just different? Some evidence suggests the ammonia really did its job. Bright togas, grease-free wool, fabric ready to take on brilliant dyes. These outcomes are hard to argue with. Ancient writers occasionally praised the whiteness of certain garments, implying the system had some success. You picture a senator beaming in the forum, his toga glowing in the sunlight, while passers-by shield their eyes. But then there's the other side of the debate. How much of this was just visual trickery? Sure, the togas looked white, But what about the lingering odor? Ancient jokes survive about laundry that smelled less than heavenly. Imagine showing up to court looking spotless but leaving a faint trail behind you, like a walking reminder of Rome's recycling system. Some historians insist that the effectiveness was exaggerated, that much of it was a matter of appearances rather than actual freshness. Modern chemists have run small-scale experiments, dunking wool into solutions meant to mimic Roman recipes. The results? Mixed, yes. Ammonia can strip grease and brighten fibers, but it can also weaken fabric if overused, leaving garments brittle. Did Romans notice this? Did they care? Or was the pressure to look dazzling in the forum more important than how many years a toga lasted? Their academic arguments spiral on, like suds in a basin. And then there's the cultural lens. Romans might not have judged clean by the same standards we do. Maybe they weren't aiming for lemony fresh. Maybe their goal was simply bright enough to impress. Historians love to wrestle with these cultural differences, pointing out that cleanliness is always a moving target across time. For you, standing outside of Salonika with the sun beating down and a faint sting of ammonia still in your nose, the debate feels a bit silly. You've seen the garments yourself, they shine, they dazzle, and yes, they smell. But maybe that was Rome's secret all along. The empire knew that in politics, in society, and even in laundry, it's better to look good than to smell good. By now, you've watched Romans stomp garments, sniff jars, argue about brightness, and you can't help but wonder, what if it were you living here? Let's imagine for a moment that your only tunic is caked with dust from the forum, splattered with olive oil from lunch, and streaked with sweat from the August sun. You have two choices: wear it as is and risk looking like a barbarian, or drop it off at the Salonika and embrace the smell. So you gather your courage in your tunic and step into the laundry shop. A worker barely looks up as he takes it, tossing it into a basin where another man is already stomping, like he's practicing for a dance contest. You feel a twinge of hesitation. That's your garment, those are his feet, and that liquid is, well, let's not think too hard about it. Days later, you return. Your tunic is hanging in the sunlight, stiff from drying but noticeably brighter. The stains are gone. It looks almost new. You hand over a few coins, grateful yet slightly conflicted. Do you really want to put it back on? The worker assures you it's perfectly fine. Though he doesn't deny the smell, you slip it over your head anyway, and immediately realize what every Roman must have accepted: dignity sometimes comes with a price. The experience makes you reflect on how laundry shaped daily life. For wealthier Romans, owning multiple outfits meant they could rotate, keeping one at the cleaners while wearing another. For poorer citizens, a single tunic might need constant care, patched and soaked again and again just to stay serviceable. Suddenly, clothing feels less like fashion and more like survival. Historians still debate whether ordinary people truly had access to professional laundries, or if many simply did their washing at home. Some argue the Salonika catered mostly to the wealthy, while others point out archaeological evidence of smaller workshops serving entire neighborhoods. Once again, No clear answer, just another stain on the record that refuses to fade. As you leave the shop, your freshened tunic rustling in the breeze, you laugh to yourself. You're cleaner, yes, but you're also a little more Roman now, wrapped in a fabric that tells the world you care about appearances, even if you know what went into making them possible. You've walked the streets, inhaled the fumes, and even worn the results. But before we drift out of this strange Roman world, it's worth asking, why does any of this still matter? After all, no one today is soaking clothes in amphorae outside their house. White. Look around your own laundry room. Shelves of detergents, powders, and sprays, all promising miracles. Bright whites, stain-free living. Fresh scent that lasts 12 days. The packaging is fancier, and the smells are lavender instead of ammonia. But the obsession is the same. Human beings haven't changed. We're still chasing the dream of clothes that look newer, cleaner, better than they actually are. The Romans remind us that this impulse runs deep. They turned waste into resource, filth into function, because the pressure to appear respectable was stronger than the disgust of the process. In a way, they pioneered the idea that presentation is half of reality. Whether it's a senator in a glowing toga or you in a press shirt at a job interview, the principle hasn't budged. Historians debate how much of this was practical and how much was symbolic. Did Romans really care about hygiene? Or did they just want the shine of whiteness? Were they conscious innovators? Were simply pragmatic recyclers who discovered ammonia by accident? The records are unclear, but the effect is undeniable. Their strange methods still echo in how we define clean today. For you, wandering one last time past the drying racks, it sinks in. Laundry is never just laundry. It's culture, it's status, it's memory and meaning stitched into fabric. The Romans may have relied on buckets of urine, but their larger lesson was about turning the ordinary into something powerful. And whether you're scooping detergent into a washer or stomping barefoot in a basin, the story is the same. You're part of a very long tradition of trying to look just a little brighter than yesterday. You step out into the Roman sun, the smell of ammonia finally fading behind you, and smile. Somehow, against all odds, you've come to admire their stubborn inventiveness, even if your cloak will never feel quite the same again. And now the streets of Rome grow quiet, the clatter of sandals fades, the vat stops sloshing, and even the sharp tang of ammonia softens into memory. You followed the journey of buckets and basins, of fullers and senators, and now it all dissolves into stillness, like laundry hung in the night breeze. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the story drift into the background, the togas, the laughter in the workshops. Even the emperor's coenti blur together, gentle echoes from a world far away. What remains is only rhythm, the steady stomp of feet, now softened into the beat of your own breathing. The lesson, if there is one, is simple. People across time have always turned the ordinary into something meaningful, even waste into dignity. But tonight, none of that needs an answer. Tonight it is enough to know that you walk the streets of Rome, and you've come back carrying only a faint smile, lighter than cloth itself. So close your eyes, let the story fold around you like a blanket and drift off. Rome will keep its tokens bright without you.